If you're a recent graduate, you've probably heard that a degree is your ticket to success, the pathway to a stable career, financial independence, and long-term security. But for many members of Generation Z, those born roughly between 1997 and 2012, the reality looks very different. Instead of stepping into stability, they are often facing rising debt, underemployment, and a sense of uncertainty about the future. So what's driving this shift, and why does this generation seem to be struggling more than those before them? There was a time in America, particularly in the decades following World War II, when a college degree was almost a golden ticket. For much of the mid-20th century, graduating from university often meant you could step into a stable, well-paid job and expect to stay with the same company for 30 or even 40 years. Companies offered pensions, healthcare, and a clear ladder for advancement. That sense of security allowed people to buy homes, raise family, and plan confidently for the future. But that world looks very different today. The traditional long-term employer-employee relationship has weakened. Lifetime employment is now the exception, not the rule. Many graduates today face short-term contracts, frequent job changes, and industries that are being disrupted faster than universities can adapt. The stability older generations experienced is far less common, leaving Gen Z feeling like the rules have changed mid-game. First, let's talk about jobs, or rather, the lack of them. Graduate unemployment in the US has hit a 37-year high. That means today's graduates are entering one of the toughest job markets in recent history. And while the unemployment rate for all workers might not look disastrous, the numbers for recent grads tell a different story. According to Business Insider, those who graduated during the pandemic hiring boom of 2021 and 2022 saw strong job outcomes. Companies were desperate for workers and grads landed positions quickly. But that wave didn't last. By early 2025, the unemployment rate for new grads had risen to around 5.8%. Entry-level jobs are shrieking, partly because companies are cutting costs and partly because automation and artificial intelligence are reshaping the kind of roles that even exist. IBM is one of the clearest examples of how AI is already reshaping the workforce. The company has automated around 94% of its routine HR tasks, from payroll to internal documentation, and as a result, it has cut thousands of jobs, with executives estimating that nearly 30% of back-office roles, about 7,800 positions, will eventually be replaced by AI. And IBM isn't alone. JP Morgan has said AI could eliminate about 10% of its operations staff. Klarna has shrunk its workforce by roughly 40% thanks to AI automation, and Ford predicts that literally half of its white-collar jobs could disappear as AI tools take over. Even tech giants like Salesforce, which laid off 1,000 workers this year, now admit that AI is already doing 30 to 50% of the company's work. Together, these cases show that what was once seen as a future concern is now a present reality. AI is cutting jobs at some of America's biggest employers. It's not just about finding work. It's about finding meaningful work. Many grads are stuck working part-time gigs or jobs unrelated to their degrees just to make ends meet. And here's the kicker. Early career underemployment doesn't just hurt in the short term. Studies show that it can reduce earnings and career prospects for years to come. Now let's add money into the equation. Gen Z is the most indebted generation in US history relative to their age. On average, Gen Z Americans carry around $94,000 in personal debt. That's higher than millennials, Gen X, or baby boomers when they were the same age. And the biggest chunk of that comes from student loans. It's not just the size of the debt that's the problem, it's the lack of financial stability around it. A recent survey found that 62% of Gen Z adults in the US don't have emergency savings. Even worse, 1 in 4 say they'd max out their credit cards if faced with an emergency. That means a car breakdown, a medical bill, or even a rent increase could push many young adults into financial tailspin. When you combine high debt with low savings, you get a generation that feels trapped. Many are delaying major life milestones like buying a house, starting a family, or saving for retirement, not because they don't want to, but because they simply can't afford to. Here's the part that really stings for graduates. The degree they worked so hard for doesn't guarantee the payoff it once did. Almost half of Gen Z grads, 49%, say their degrees feel obsolete. Employers increasingly value hands-on experience, digital skills, and AI literacy over traditional credentials. In fact, some employers openly admit that college isn't preparing young people for the realities of the modern workplace. And then there's credential inflation. Jobs that used to require a high school diploma now ask for a bachelor's degree. Jobs that once needed a bachelor's degree now ask for a master's. But the added years of education and the added student debt don't necessarily lead to better job outcomes. Instead, grads are overqualified for entry-level work, but underqualified for the jobs they really want. The result? A degree feels like a mandatory hurdle rather than a ticket to upward mobility. This ties into another big issue: the mismatch between what colleges are teaching and what employers actually need. The US higher education system is producing more graduates than the market can absorb, especially in certain fields. That leads to underemployment, where grads are working jobs that don't require their degree. Meanwhile, industries like tech, healthcare, and skilled trades are desperate for workers with specialised skills. But the pipeline from university to these industries isn't strong enough. So while we've created a generation of highly educated individuals, we haven't necessarily given them the tools to thrive in the jobs that are growing the fastest. This disconnect leaves many grads frustrated, asking, what was all this for? And then there's the mental health side of this crisis. Gen Z is facing some of the highest rates of anxiety and depression of any generation. A Gallup survey found that only 39% of Gen Z adults in the US feel they are thriving. That's down from 44% just a year earlier. Young women in particular report lower levels of well-being. And it's not hard to see why. Financial instability, job insecurity, and debt are heavy burdens. Adding social pressures, political polarisation, and global uncertainty, and you've got a recipe for stress. Many young adults describe the American dream as a scam, something that worked for older generations but is now out of reach for them. Home ownership, stable careers, and upward mobility feel like distant fantasies rather than achievable goals. Ironically, even the things meant to make work easier can add to the problem. Remote work, for example, gives flexibility, but 45% of Gen Z workers say they miss in-person interaction. That loneliness compounds existing struggles with mental health, and cultural clashes in the workplace, like oversharing on social media or challenging traditional norms, have led to firings and added instability. The reality is that Gen Z graduates in the US are in crisis. They're entering one of the toughest job markets in decades, saddled with unprecedented debt and questioning the value of the education system that was supposed to prepare them for success. But crises also spark change. What do you think? Is the system failing Gen Z, or is this just part of a generational cycle? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this breakdown useful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a deep dive from Eureka USA.